Welcome to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Scarlette from Springfield PD in Illinois. He has 27 years experience in law enforcement, and I'm really excited to have him as today's guest. So welcome to the show, Chief Scarlette. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, listen, Paige, it's an honor to be with you today and an important topic that we have the opportunity to discuss. And I'm just glad to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it. And for anyone who's listening, you have a milestone coming up here in a couple of weeks. You are set to retire on May 30th.
Yeah, that's correct. It's something that us in the law enforcement industry, I think we certainly work our whole careers towards is that end date where we can, kind of turn the page and on the next chapter in life and see what that exactly consists of. But yeah, 27 plus years with the Springfield Police Department. It's been an absolute blessing, and I've enjoyed, for the most part, every moment of it. And I'm looking forward to turning over the reins to competent staff and seeing what's next in life for me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm hoping that we'll stay in touch so I can, kind of see what that next transition looks like for you because that's exciting. It's a new chapter, but I would love to maybe give a little bit of context into your career. What did those 27 years look like for you?
I've had the opportunity. Let me back up and say that law enforcement, specifically the Springfield Police Department, is the only full-time job I've ever had in my entire life. I took this job at a little over 21 years old, right out of college, and I came from a law enforcement family. My father served 30 years with the state police, so really, law enforcement is all I ever knew and all I ever wanted to do. So, again, I entered the career at 21 years old. I had the opportunity to serve in every division with the Springfield Police Department and promoted through every rank. Got to serve in a lot of cool roles from 5 years supervising our criminal investigations division. Spent 13 years on our SWAT team in a variety of roles. I was on our honor guard unit. I was part of our gang team. I served in the staff at every level, overseeing budgets and all sorts of non-cop related stuff. And my career culminated with serving as chief of police for the last 3+ years.
I love it. So you always knew like this was the career for you, no other option, law enforcement is it.
It's funny, and you're absolutely right. And I have two daughters that one's in grad school and one's a sophomore in college, and they're still kind of wishy-washy about what their career path is going to be. And I find that interesting because, to your point, all I ever knew is I was going to be a police officer. It didn't matter where or who I was going to serve with. That was my one and only goal. So I've never really had this concept of unsuredness of what I wanted to do. It's always been law enforcement.
Did you ever have a why that really kind of kept you going throughout your career? I know that, we kind of talk about this a lot and that question is brought up, at different points within the career of like, what is your why? Like, why do you do this career? And, using that as a way to kind of get you through the hard times. Do you feel like you had a specific why throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have to have that why. You have to have that noble calling, that desire, that passion, that empathy, that compassion towards others. All those things represent part of my why. Because to your point, each one of us faces all sorts of challenges in this career field. There are bad days and then there are really bad days. And obviously, we see a lot of suffering and tumultuous times in our careers. So, to be able to, at the end of the day or at the end of a career, to be able to focus on, I know exactly why I signed up to do this. I know what I was getting into, and it's really that calling to go help and serve and protect and be that resource, that level of comfort for the citizens of our community.
And I know that, and it's really apparent to me in the conversations we've had offline and just seeing you now that you have absolutely loved being in this career for the last 27 years. But I also know that you said that there are challenges, and everyone who's in this profession will face challenging times. You said bad days and worse days. What are some things that helped you to get through that? Was there anything that you did for your own personal wellness that helped you during those hard times?
Yeah, I think, some of the stereotypical answers, which I would have for myself, is I'm a big proponent of physical wellness. So I work out constantly, sometimes to the point of detriment where I injure myself because of overworking out. So that's something
We don't
I
want to
certainly
do that.
don't want to do that, but that's definitely something. Physical wellness is important. I'm a Christian man, so my faith is extremely important, and I rely on my faith in God to help me through again terrible times or whatnot. So those are really the two main things, the takeaways that I have that have helped me through some very tragic times here at the Springfield Police Department. Obviously, my relationship with my wife, we just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. So she's been the rock that's kind of held me together throughout this entire season of life. There's one thing that I think we talked about that I say oftentimes, and this is for my friends in law enforcement, but also for the general public. Oftentimes, people forget that behind this uniform and this badge is a real life human being, someone that experiences emotion, is dealing with tragedy and issues in their personal lives that have to kind of put that aside and come to work. And so, I think the public just assumes we're robots showing up to handle their specific needs. But each call that we go on as law enforcement officers has a huge impact on not only our careers, but the rest of our lives.
Yeah. And I think that is an important reminder because you are humans and there's no way you can go 27 years and experience the things that you experience and it not impact you. And so we talked a little bit, offline, and I think we connected on this point of, I think that the tendency, I think it's human nature to a point, but I think especially in law enforcement where there's this tendency because you have to go from call to call to call. And sometimes the only time you have to recover from one call is the time it takes to get to the next one. And so there's this level of kind of shoving things down and throwing away the key and not really processing those things. And I know you and I both have had experiences with that in our lives and kind of having that moment where everything bubbles to the surface and then you have to, have those resources that are going to help to offload that. And, for me, it was all the things we talked about before, but for me, it was, yoga and breathing and mindfulness. And for you, physical fitness and family and your faith. What advice would you give to, maybe someone who's earlier in their career as far as like how you can offload those things so you don't end up in that position where everything is bubbling to the surface and you're in some sort of crisis where now you have to deal with it?
Yeah, and before I offer some advice, maybe I should give a testimony too as to how I am infallible human being like the rest of society.
Mhm.
So I mentioned I spent 5 years in the criminal investigations division supervising major cases from homicides, deaths of all sorts, tragic incidences. And again, you're responding to an individual's absolute worst nightmare, worst experience, and you have to be the one to help them pick up the pieces, put the puzzle together, but also be there, as an emotional support. And for years and years in that role, to your point, I would shove stuff deep down into my chest, hoping that it would just go away. And for the most part, you know what, it did. But there was a specific time when that stuff rose to the surface. And quite frankly, I didn't know what was going on at the time, but ultimately determined that it was, anxiety and PTSD related to what I had experienced in my career. And, it took a while to admit that, to understand that, to be able to speak about that publicly, and also figure out a way to deal with that. And so I think, being able to share my own experience, and I know I'm certainly not the only one in law enforcement field that has experienced that sort of trauma, but being able to share that and be, real with my officers and say, hey, it affected me. And here's how I dealt with it, and begin to look proactively at the mental health side of law enforcement. That's been extremely, at the top of my list as my tenure as chief is something that I wanted to see through. Whatever resources we could offer to our men and women, so that they may not have to go through what I went through as a young officer.
Yeah. And do you think that because you had that experience, that that helped you to be a better leader?
Oh, without a doubt. I think it, certainly leads to me being more empathetic towards what other people are experiencing. Everyone experiences trauma, grief, tragedy differently, right? So we should never turn a blind eye to, the way that someone may be handling a specific situation. Rather, we should be there offering those proactive resources we can to help them through those traumatic situations. And one thing that we implemented under my tenure as chief is bringing in crisis incident stress management team out of the St. Louis area. And we bring that particular group of individuals in. They're specially trained, some law enforcement, other first responders. They come in and speak one-on-one with our officers who are involved in a major critical incident, and really, again, give them the opportunity to get stuff off their chest, give them the opportunity, to confide in these individuals and offer any sort of counseling and resources that they can. And that's been extremely helpful.
Yeah, and I love a few things that you said. One, being more proactive. I think that when we have experienced things ourselves, we have that perspective of how do we get in front of it so that no one has to feel like I felt, And I know when we talked offline, like that was one of the things you said. You're like, I want to make sure that I have resources in place so that, your officers don't experience the same thing that you did and they can learn from that. But I also think, having the ability to be vulnerable and to share those things is so powerful. And I think that a lot of times what we do just in general is we try to have this image of perfection. And I think that it's so unrelatable and it actually creates more of that unsafe space where people don't feel like they can share or reach out for resources because they feel like they're alone. But when you have individuals like yourself, especially in leadership, who are saying, hey, like you're not alone. I've been through this too. And here's what I've been through. These are some of the things that I helped. Here are some things that we're offering you to help you. I think that that's extremely powerful.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. And I think, again, you almost have this stigma as a law enforcement officer that you're larger than life. And again, we are all human beings that are experience stuff in our own unique ways. And so to be in the driver's seat to say, I recognize this can happen to you, and I want to provide these resources to you, whether that's a mental health avenue, whether that's mentorship, whether that's peer support, whether that's chaplain services. We offer financial services as well. I mean, our officers, again, can struggle in all sorts of different ways. So it's up to us as leaders to provide, to identify those measures that we can offer them to ensure that they have the resources necessary to be successful.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things that we talked about, and you said it, I didn't say it. And I'm going to say this because everyone gives me like the eye roll when I say it, but this idea of holistic wellness, which I'm of course completely on board with. And we can just put tactical in front of it if someone's not into the word holistic, but I know that you take a proactive but also a holistic approach when it comes to wellness. And you mentioned some of those things as far as different methods or pillars of wellness within your organization. Maybe you can give a little bit of insight into some of the specifics, but then more importantly, like the importance of having different options for people, because I do think that wellness is dynamic and there's a lot of different facets to it, and not everyone is going to be into the same thing. So how are you creating that more dynamic, holistic approach within your organization?
Yeah, to your point, there is no out of the box method that solves everyone's issues and everyone's crises at the time. So it's important to, continue to be, we mentioned proactive, be on the forefront, seeing what's out there. We recently sent some officers to yoga for first responders, like you mentioned. I mean, to bring that back just to provide, a different avenue on ways that people can deal with their stress. And so one of the things that we did shortly after my tenure, I came in as chief, contracted with a consulting company. It's called Visions LLC. And essentially, they came in and said, we're going to sort of survey the wellness options that you have in place, and let's figure out how we can put all them under one umbrella and make this a more successful package. If there's one thing I will say about our department, we have these sort of certain niches of wellness already carved out, but they were in their own individual silos. I would task a certain individual to kind of put, let's just say, a financial wellness package in place, and then that individual may get promoted or retire, and then that piece would kind of fall off the table. So it was important to bring all these resources back under one umbrella. And so we consulted with this, we contracted with this consulting company to put these all these measures in place. So Visions came in, they reviewed all of our programs, and I'm just going to read them verbatim. It was our mentorship program, which is extremely important, offering brand new officers a mentorship program with a senior officer when they get hired. So they have that initial resource right out of the gate to kind of address what they may be experiencing at the police academy or in the field training program. So that was extremely important. They addressed the mental health program. Again, this is something we talked about, encouraging our men and women to go to what we call the EAP, Employee Assistance Program, in a proactive manner versus using it as discipline as a result of an incident that the employee's been through is extremely important. So we encourage proactive visits to the mental health program. Family program. We offer support for not only our officers, but the officers' families. And, my wife took advantage of that many years ago, but this job affects more than the individuals wearing a uniform. It affects everyone that resides in their house as well. So providing resources to family. I mentioned peer support, extremely important that, again, our officers have the opportunity to speak with fellow officers in a confidential manner about specific calls, and that has been successful. Again, physical health. One thing that we did, we have, it's called the PFIT program. Essentially, it's bench press, running, sit and reach, sit ups, all that good stuff. We offered a compensation for individuals that would take the PFIT test on an annual basis, and the better you did, the more comp hours you would get. Just as a way to incentivize people to stay in great physical shape. Financial program, I mentioned that. We use the Dave Ramsey Smart Dollar program. That's something that extremely important when it comes to wellness. And then chaplain services. And again, not everyone has a religious background, but for those that do, we want to offer the services. And those chaplains have been a huge resource for us during critical incidents here. So some of the other stuff we talked about, yoga for first responders. I think that's extremely important. We partnered with some in-treatment facilities down in Florida, as well as the Rockford area, to give our officers that need the help the opportunity to go seek help. And again, I would be the guy that would encourage any officer to take advantage of that stuff versus, being someone who may say, shame on you for needing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's where it starts, right? It's like, how can you create a culture where it's accepted and it's encouraged to take advantage of these resources? And I think that that's kind of the question that popped in my head is, and I think it's the golden question across the board is, how do you build that culture and how do you get people to take advantage of these things? Are you finding success? Are people really like gravitating towards these things? And how do you create that within your organization?
I think it's about trust, just about anything else. I mean, the people need to trust their leader, and what better way to work on that trust and build that trust than being an out front leader who says, I had a problem, I addressed it, I go seek treatment on a proactive basis to ensure that, these issues don't continue. I take care of myself. I'm in the best shape that I could be in. I take advantage of all these programs. So I think that's the first step, build that trust. And then when it comes to really the mental health, which I think is probably the most important right now in law enforcement field, it's a matter of convincing the men and women of this agencies to accept the fact that we can all experience that trauma. And so that, again, that's the big thing. How can our officers trust us as leaders to say, I'm going to seek proactive help because it may help me in the future? So getting out in front of it and just being that leader that leads from the front is important.
Yeah. And I know we talked a little bit, and I was hoping that you could maybe explain your thoughts on this, but we know that as individuals, but also as an organization, the more happy and healthy you are within yourself, the better your performance is going to be on the job, the more active you're going to be with your family. It all intertwines. And you had mentioned to me that the number one step in de-escalation is how the officer appears, the officer appearance. Could you maybe dive into that? Because I thought that that was a really interesting statement.
Yeah, so with the Springfield Police Department, we have a use of force continuum, and that's essentially how much force can I use on a specific call based on what the offender may be doing to reciprocate that. So the first step on that use of force continuum is officer presence. How the officer, shows up, the fact that they are there in uniform. And I think part of what I have heard personally from offenders out there on the street is that they size up the officer who they're dealing with, and that determines how they're going to respond to the officer's commands. I literally have heard that more than one time. And so, being an officer who, one, is in great physical shape, who, looks good in their uniform and looks professional and can show up, hop out of the squad car, ready to go to action, I think does in fact offer that de-escalation component that anyone that looks at that individual is going to say, okay, this is not the person I'm going to take up my fight with. I'm going to comply. And so I think that's extremely important. And, it says a lot about the profession too. I think we've all seen those officers that can really wear a uniform and look top notch. And then we've seen those officers that may bring some level of embarrassment towards the profession. So I think, just encouragement in general about taking care of ourselves can in fact be a de-escalation tool.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. And I was writing notes because what you're saying is physical fitness equals de-escalation. And I think it makes sense, to your point, like if someone shows up and they don't look like they can take them, then they might respond differently. That person might respond differently. So I think it's a really interesting take. I've never heard that before, but I think it makes total sense. I know that you talked about, obviously the importance of physical fitness, mental wellness. You mentioned financial, and we talked a little bit about this before, and how a lot of young, I would say younger officers are really taking advantage of the opportunity to make more money. And the more conversations I have in this space is more like you kind of get yourself in a hole, right? Like you come into the profession, you're making decent money, and then maybe you buy a truck, or then you buy the truck and then you need something to like tow behind the truck. And then, now you have a house that you can't afford, or you start a family. And so there's a lot of people who are coming in and maybe don't know how to manage that money. And so then what they do is they start working overtime to try to, recoup and kind of stay afloat, and how that impacts your wellness. What are you seeing in that particular space?
Well, what I'm seeing first and foremost, Paige, is we don't just get the truck. We have to get the lift kit on the truck and the fat tires and the LED lights underneath, because that's the cool stuff, right?
Yeah,
So,
yep.
uh, no, but to your point, I mean, I mentioned that I came on at 21 years old, and we hire a lot of young kids, and I think it's extremely important to give them that financial wellness and financial understanding of how to take care of themselves. Uh, I think things have changed in the law enforcement profession to the point where you can now make a very good living as a law enforcement officer, especially in central Illinois. But to go along with that, you can also spend a lot of money. And I think so you have to be able to balance that, right? And one thing that we see here, regardless of maybe what debt or what I own or owe, people see the dollar signs and are attracted to that. So we see officers that not only work a 10-hour shift with our agency, but then say we call them off-duty jobs. The off-duty jobs are endless out there. You could work 24/7, 365 if you wanted to. So the officers begin to recognize, oh, I can get paid by Springfield Police, and then I could go work these couple of off-duty jobs, and that's some great money. And they begin to get that itch for more and more and more. And again, maybe they're not financially irresponsible, but it's just that drive for more and more money. And I think what young officers or officers in general begin to do is replace our individual physical, mental wellness with the dollar signs, right? And so they say, I only need 4 hours of sleep because I'm going to work 20 hours this day. And so I think that's a fine line that we as leaders have to kind of be careful of, but also teach our officers that, from the Bible, it says money is the root of all evil. And I think this would be a perfect example of that you could drive yourself into the grave, quite frankly, chasing money, especially in this profession.
Yeah. And I think the question I always have is like, what price are you actually paying for that because regardless of the money, I think that there's a personality type and I share this personality type of, I will work 15, 17, 18-hour days. Like if I don't manage my wellness appropriately, like I will do that too, where I work myself into the ground because I want to help people and, I want to say yes to everything. And I think at my core, I'm a people pleaser. So I have to work on that to like set strong boundaries for myself. But I have learned over time, and I do think that time gives you wisdom and knowledge, and you kind of have to learn. I think that, when I was in my 20s, you couldn't tell me anything. I kind of had to learn on my own some of those things. And I recognized later in life that there's nothing more important than your wellness. Really, there's not. You have to have your wellness to be able to do anything, to show up for your family, to show up for your job, your community. Like you have to have your wellness intact. But I also recognized pretty early on that I was sacrificing everything else that was important for something that I thought was more important. And when I stepped away from that, I realized that I'm really not that important. And for me, like what I was doing that I thought was really important, this job that I was doing, this career that I had, um, people forgot about me pretty quick, and I really did sacrifice a lot of my life for my job. And I still do because I love what I do. And I think what I do is important. And I'm not saying don't put your all into your career in a certain way, but I think that it is that question of like, what are you giving up? If you're working 20 hours a week and you're not sleeping, you're not eating well, your decision making is not going to be sound. Your performance is not going to be sound. You're not going to be present and showing up for your family. And so, what is that ultimate price that you're paying?
Yeah, and we have a slogan that we use around here, and it's you have to pour into your own cup before you can pour into others' cups, or you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. And I think that's an extremely important message to hammer home. Yeah, I expect when you show up that you're going to give 100% of your effort to do your job. I mean, that's just who we are as human beings. But I also expect that you're going to come to work, in a right state of mind to where you've had ample sleep and food and all that. And I think, we talk about working maybe 15 to 20 hours a day, that not only affects you that day, but that's going to affect you then when you have to turn around and come to work tomorrow. And ultimately that could lead to, we talk about de-escalation, that could lead to a use of force situation simply because you were tired or you didn't prepare yourself for the day. So I think there's a lot that plays into how we take care of ourselves and off duty when it comes to actually showing up then for work. And I really would like to mention two things. We talked about the culture here at the Springfield Police Department, and again, this agency was not, or my tenure as chief has not been immune to our own tragedies. I saw an officer who was a great guy, one of our best officers, and was also a military man, and found himself in some trouble related to alcohol and drugs, related to PTSD from his time in the military and this job, and ultimately cost him his life due to a drug overdose. And I had also had a lieutenant who retired and a week later took his life, and it was again related to the job. So I think those are just examples of the fact that we all need to continue to work at this and recognize that again we're dealing with human beings here who have their own sets of issues going on, and we have to provide every bit of resource that we can to help them.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think that the hope is that there's more of that proactive wellness measures, but I think that there's also some, responsibility on the individual of actually taking advantage. And I talk about this a lot. It's like, you know, I see wellness as three steps. One is awareness. You're aware that these things are challenging, or you're aware that you're in a profession that is going to come with its fair share of challenges, or you're aware that maybe you're not taking care of yourself. So, the first step is awareness phase. The second step is education. So once you're aware that there's these challenges, how can you educate yourself to understand what are those things that I can implement into my life that are going to help with that? But then the third one, and I think that this is the hardest and the one that's often missed, is action. You have to take action. And so I think that having all these resources available is so important. But I think the message to anyone, who's in this career is, okay, now you have the education and the awareness. How can you now take advantage of those things so that you can prepare yourself for a long and successful career? And, the thing that I find really fascinating is, we talked about your why earlier. And I often ask people, like, what is your wellness why? Like, why is it important for you as an individual to be well? And everyone has different answers to that. And that has to come from you. But one of the things that I think is a commonality is longevity. I think that everyone wants to have a long life. At the end of the day, everyone wants to have a long and successful life. And I think that if you can connect with that of like, okay, I want to have a long life, then you can start to work backwards of, okay, what can I do to get there? But if you don't take action, there's no way that you're going to be able to achieve that. So I think that that's maybe one of the things that's missed.
I couldn't agree more with you. And there's a lot of stuff to break down in what you just said there. And I'm gonna try and mention a few points if I can. One, I just talked with our pension representative today, as a matter of fact, and one thing that he said is, the average life expectancy for those in law enforcement is 57 and a half years right now. So, I mean, think about that. We spend a majority of our lives working and dealing with tragedies out in the community, all for the opportunity to enjoy retirement, right? And then, potentially retirement could only be a couple of years if we don't take care of ourselves. And I think, to your point, everyone, the department can provide you the awareness, and we provide the education. And I'll even giving you some action steps and even entice you to take action. But ultimately, it's up to the individual person to take action, and we have to take action if we want to not be one of those statistics of 57 and a half. And so I know that has to be the goal of every law enforcement officer, is to live, a wonderful, fulfilled life beyond law enforcement. But if we don't proactively take the steps in our younger years, it's going to catch up with us.
I think it's to a message to anyone who is younger. You don't have to be in leadership to encourage that within yourself and your peers. This was the first time this ever happened to me. I thought this was so cool. I worked a pre-hire, a pre-academy class, and this young man, everyone looks very young to me, so I couldn't tell you how young he was, but I would probably say early 20s. He walked up to me and he's like, I have questions. Like, what can I do? What can I do before a workout? What can I do after a workout? Like, tell me all the things I can do because I want to have a long career and I don't want to become injured. And I was like, wow, like what a cool mentality. You haven't even gone through the academy yet. And you're already like, okay, what are my action steps? What can I implement now to make sure that I can reduce my risk of injury throughout my entire career? And I think that if you have more individuals like that who say, you know what, like it's important to me, I want to make sure I have a long career, that's contagious. You have that power to inspire others to take those same steps. And so I think that small actions create lasting change. And that, to your point, goes back to also building that culture internally of like, start with yourself. And if you focus on yourself and you have those results, other people are going to want to follow that lead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you do see that among some of the younger officers, that physical fitness is extremely important. And, and I think those individuals are leaders. I would call them more influential leaders at their level, right? Because people do look to them for advice and, kind of pay attention to maybe what they look like in a uniform and say, well, I want to be like that person. So I consider those individuals leaders. And I think it becomes that balancing act, right? I mean, to be able to say, I'm going to take care of myself as I start out my law enforcement career, but then to be able to be enticed with these financial opportunities with additional work, it's extremely important. And so I think, again, hammering home very early that a long life expectancy is much more well deserved than a few extra dollars on a paycheck. That's very valuable.
100%. And I know that you're now, I mean, you've been in this career for 27 years. You are in the transition to retire. And I would love if you maybe gave a little bit of insights into what's next and, some of the things that you're excited about, because I know we talked a little offline about like, wow, like you can enjoy some time off and, obviously you had a long and successful career and the hope is that you have just as many years in your retirement as you had in your career.
Well, one thing I think I would start by saying, and you mentioned it about, sort of your career opportunities is so the Springfield Police Department has been around since 1840, and there's been a lot of chiefs that have come way before me, and there'll be a lot of chiefs after me. So I need to recognize that this is not Ken Scarlett's police department. This is the Springfield Police Department, and that, I did my job and I did it well during my tenure, and I need to be able to be accepting of the fact that I'm going to step out of this role and people aren't going to call me anymore. And, everything that I did as chief is now going to be passed on to someone else. I think, quite frankly, I look forward to that. I look forward to the opportunity to step back into this. I'm just Ken Scarlett role now. And I think that is something that I have worked hard towards. And again, I think, my love and my passion has always been law enforcement, always will be law enforcement, but I also knew that there would be an end game in sight, and I've reached that. And I think it's important to reach that with a positive attitude and on top of the game, I guess, if you will. And it's important to say it's time to pass the buck, and that's what I'm doing. And I have confidence in my senior staff to take over. But so what's next for me? I think is just stepping back into civilian life, civilian role, and what that looks like. I don't know. I know my wife and I are interested in travel. A lot of stuff that I feel like maybe we put on hold, especially during my tenure as chief. It's now my time to reward her and reward our relationship by taking advantage of some of those opportunities. So I'm looking forward to what is next. I did mention to you. I will say it to everyone. Once I kind of my wife and I made that decision that retirement was upon us, I began to feel this sort of freeing feeling of the weight of the world is starting to come off of my shoulders as a result of knowing my tenure is coming to an end. And so to be able to experience things in this world that, as crazy as it sounds, are much more clear and crisper now, knowing that retirement here has already been a huge reward. And I look forward to spending many, many, many years enjoying the fruits of my labor.
I love that attitude so much because I think that oftentimes when we talk about retirement, there's this idea of like I'm losing who I am or I'm losing my identity. And for you to say like I recognize that, I love this agency and I've been a leader within this organization, but it's not all that I am.
Yeah.
It's a part of who I am and it always will be, but it's not everything. I think is a really great attitude to have. And I think that will carry you on into your career. And I think it's a result of the work that you've done, to everything that we've talked about. If you prioritize your wellness, there is an opportunity for you to leave this career and have a long and successful retirement with your health intact and have a positive mental attitude, have your family there that you can enjoy and go travel, have your fitness and intact so that you can enjoy those things. So I love that attitude and I love that you're transitioning out and you're excited and you have your health intact and you're ready.
Well, I do too, Paige, and I'm looking forward to the next chapter for sure.
I have one final question for you, and this is one of the reasons I started this podcast is so that we can, inspire the younger generation to take care of themselves and have a long and successful career and retirement like you. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known or something that has helped you along the way.
Well, I think a couple things. I think the first thing is that again, we like to be called superheroes, if you will, but we aren't necessarily superheroes. So you have to recognize your own limitations. You have to recognize that you're going to be affected by what you see in this career field, and you have to accept it's going to cause trauma in your life, and you have to be one that takes advantage of the resources that are available to help you through those situations. That's what I would say to the officer about taking care of themselves. The other thing I would say, and this is more about just law enforcement officers starting out, you have to be empathetic. You have to be, and you have to treat people as people, because at the end of the day, that's what we all are. We all are people, and we are in this role, obviously, to take bad people to jail and to keep innocent victims safe. But I get that. I recognize that. But it's about being human and treating others with dignity and respect and compassion. I think that in and of itself will affect your relationships, not only with the community, but will affect, how you feel about yourself deep down in your heart. And that ultimately affects your health going forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great words of advice. I honestly, it's been an honor. I really appreciate your time, and I'm so happy we were able to do this before your retirement day. And, thank you. Just thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, Paige, it was my pleasure, and I'm honored to be asked to be a part of this podcast. And I hope just a little bit of my words may inspire a young officer or a leader of an organization, and to make that organization or that individual better.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think it will. I'm pretty confident that it will. So I really appreciate it and hope we will stay in touch. I'd love to hear, in a couple of years how everything's going for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Me too. Talk soon.
All right.